dollars in corporate travel spend. So, money talks. So we can use this money to send a demand signal towards greener suppliers. But we are also, probably better organized with fewer big players in terms of
to do. What will be your peaks, maybe top three peaks for reduce the environmental impact of the business travel?
So yeah, I wish, Manuel, I had the magic wand. So what we're seeing, with the corporate travel segments, and the reason why we feel that we have a big responsibility as a sector is because, you mentioned to the 1.3 trillion dollars in corporate travel spend. So, money talks. So we can use this money to send a demand signal towards greener suppliers. But we are also, probably better organized with fewer big players in terms of, companies that have science-based targets, have pledged to emission reductions, and now they need to make it happen in a way that is not defaulting to less travel, because these companies need to rely on travel to do their business, but in a way that is, better travel, mindful travel. So for us, when we look at corporate travel policies, it does start with the concept of the return on investment and return on emissions of a trip. So, we're not saying that, we see the benefits and the value and the multiplier effect of business travel. It doesn't mean that, everyone should be jumping on a plane like pre-pandemic levels. There is a lot of mindfulness to be considering. And these are the right discussions to be having in corporates in terms of how to travel better. So it's starting with, if the travel needs to happen, what's the value? Can that travel be longer to make sure, that one travel, allows you to meet more stakeholders, more customers, more people, and then, making sure the choices are the right one. In Europe, we have a lot of discussion about rail as an alternative to air travel because it's there. But it's also, not easy because we're talking about cross-border rail, about booking platforms that are not presenting these options, about barriers that, beyond the corporate tool is around, passenger rights and liability, who's responsible. So, sometimes what can be something that is triggered at the level of the travel policy, we always need to check what the feasibility is and what are the barriers. And this is our added value, with GBTA. We're listening to all of these barriers and where there are solutions and low-hanging fruits, how, they can be implemented in a way that will reduce emissions. But when there are barriers and there's government intervention needed, we're going to go to, policymakers in Europe, like in Brussels, but also in Washington, D.C., to make sure that we can discuss, the infrastructural changes or, policies that will help unlock this. But, when it comes to simple steps in travel policy, we've actually outlined a series of best practices. So it's from the switch to rail to, having booking tools that show the lowest options, encouraging travelers to pick those lowest carbon option before the lowest cost option. So there's also an amount of investment that needs to go in there. It's about direct flights versus layovers. So there are a lot of on paper, easy to implement things, but some of them are going to have a cost impact, and some of them are going to have an impact on the, potentially well-being of travelers when you're talking about, economy class versus business class. So again, we don't have the magic travel policy that is, like kind of bringing your emissions to a minimum, because it's always a balancing act. And what we've been telling to our members is it's very important to take measures that match the culture of the company, and that is a discussion with the travelers and the employees themselves. Because if you think about it, it's also a retention like discussion, but it's also to attract talents, because all of the new generation of professionals want to know that the companies they are joining are doing the right thing and putting in place measures to address the environmental impact. So if they join a company in Europe that is saying, okay, if it's a trip less than 8 hours, you need to take a train rather than rail. It needs to go also with, okay, and we're going to share our journeys. We've seen a lot of this, on LinkedIn, by companies that implemented these policies. They actually have their travelers tell about, like their train and rail road trips across Europe. And, there's, and then maybe you give a day off to come to your travelers if they've been, like having long journeys. So, there are some type of perks and things that can be tied to the travel policy. But again, like travel policy is one of the many levers in the toolbox of corporate travel professional and procurement professional, because it needs to go with emissions tracking and reporting. It needs to go with like supplier and procurement engagement, and also with investments. Should it be, in sustainable aviation fuel, in like some companies are still doing some offsets, so how they can move to higher quality offsets. So there are a lot of things that companies can do to, like have more sustainable business travel programs beyond their travel policies.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing together actually all the, three pillars of sustainability, because really it's not only about it's also about the profitability, it's about the planet, it's about the people, and bringing that together in a true ESG fashion. You briefly mentioned about European Union regulations, and maybe we save it for our next discussion, because it's a topic on itself and it's a large one. From the hotel convention in June, I picked up one trend also. People, and that can affect also GBTA. People now are moving their travel days from Monday to or Tuesday to Thursday, to going Thursday to Monday, and bring their family along. So this barrier between business travel and family travel, as you mentioned, also getting a day off and so on, it could be a trend, and this is sort of paralleling the trend of remote work, of introduction of AI technologies and remote work technologies. So thank you for sort of putting everything together in one piece. And to continue maybe a little bit, and you mentioned already a number of ways to reduce the environmental impact. One area where AKFI is working these days is the issue of the supply chain. And of course, the travel industry is probably on the top in long, complex supply chains which span across the globe. Just imagine a plane flying from New York to Paris, let's say, and how many suppliers are involved. Any view on the supply chain and the impact on the or how GBTA maybe discusses the supply chains?
Yeah, I mean, like the work we're doing is really to like bring all of the key players along the supply chain. So, our supply chain from a corporate travel perspective, starts with the buyers, from like downstream side. So when we go upstream, it's important to have the discussion with the like distribution channels and booking systems. and then, down to the airlines, the hotels, and the ground transport. But as you rightly point out, then there is the supply chain of the suppliers, which is also, a very important discussion to be having. So, for us, when we look at these, it's been very helpful, again, like focusing on emission reductions and climate action, to have this shared ownership around the emissions. So this is when, the concept of scope 3 emissions and the fact that, the emissions from your suppliers or your customers are your emissions. This is something that has been a game changer when it comes to, like cross value chain action to tackle the issue. Where we stand, business travel emissions are scope 3 category 6. So it's really like defined under the GHG protocol. And then, it ties to the fact that, when you look at air travel emissions, this is the scope 1 and 2 for the airlines. So whatever airlines are doing to, like procure more sustainable fuel, and another wide range of measures. I think, for airlines, it's complicated because 98% of their emissions actually come from the fuel they burn. So what we've seen, and this is to illustrate one example of that supply chain approach with business travel specifically, is that, given that if you take a corporate travel program, most of the emissions will come from air travel. If you take the airlines, most of their emissions will come from the fuel they burned. It become a discussion with the fuel producers. So that's why, we are talking with companies like Shell, but also with Neste, with Sky Energy, with a lot of the players that have committed to increase the supply and the production of sustainable aviation fuels, to be saying, okay, how can the corporates directly incentivize this production? Because it's a massive issue right now, the fact that, we have fuel that is going to reduce emissions from air is just not available right now. And one of the main reasons is that the costs are, like up to 5 times more than, traditional jet fuel. So we have seen a lot of support from the corporate traveler community to actually be working with their airline partners to help supply the fuel, or to participate in joint procurement platform, where they actually can have RFP that actually go directly to the fuel producers. And we've even seen corporates that work directly with fuel producers and have offtake agreements, to actually source more sustainable fuel. So, it's a great example, I feel like, in our sector about supply chain momentum, like in action.
Well, we definitely want you back as soon as possible, and I know you personally have to meet the GBTA global footprint, if I may call it this way. But I'll turn for the last 2 questions to Isabella, and really hopefully we can connect soon again.
Thank you, Manuel. Looking into the future, Delphine, what are some of the key sustainability goals that the organization you work with has set for 2024 and beyond?
So this is a very timely question, because this week we had a meeting with our Sustainability Leadership Council to validate our roadmap for next year. We are gonna, continue pushing activities and action across 3 pillars. And I would say that for next year, the key one is gonna be harmonization. It's harmonization. It's still so fragmented and confusing out there that it's getting in the way of progress, even when stakeholders are committed to progress. And this is where actually we can add value, having all of the players around the table, what we are looking at harmonizing is the way emissions are being tracked, calculated, and reported to make sure, that it's a level playing field when we are telling, travelers to pick like the flights that will have lower emission. We need to make sure that this is actually a lower emission flight. So there is a lot of work that is being undertaken by GBTA, but in collaboration with a lot of other groups working on the similar issue. We are working with Travelist. The European Commission has a proposal on the table, but it's also GFG protocol to make sure that we can also account for market-based mechanisms in reduction in the full life cycle of fuels, for instance, that this can be relayed in the emissions that are being shown at the point of sale. But it's also harmonization of procurement criteria. And I mentioned earlier, the power of this aggregated demand of the $1.3 trillion in business travel spent. So one of the discussion we had is how do we move this towards more sustainable suppliers? And we need, a harmonized way of being able to assess the performance of airlines, the performance of hotels, the performance of car rental companies, and so on, to make sure that, this can fit into the final decision on suppliers. So we're really excited, with GBTA, we are actually going to release next year our sustainable procurement criteria for hotels, airlines, ground transport, and rail, hoping, this can be embraced and adopted by all of the buyers across the world. We got already great signals of endorsement by the fact that today there is an announcement by the White House on the way they're going to green their own federal travel. And GBTA and our sustainable procurement criteria are part of the fact sheet of the White House. So, there's going to be a strong focus again on harmonization next year. We're also going to continue our work on capacity building. And what we feel is, we've outlined a pathway for corporate travel managers to start, advance, and lead when it comes to, managing emissions from their business travel program. But sometimes, it's a bit daunting or, it's difficult to navigate for corporate travel managers. So what we want to be doing next year is to actually launch an accelerator challenge where we're actually going to get traction, with this pathway to make sure that, we can inspire as well, companies by sharing best practices and also encourage innovation in the space. And the third priority for our advocacy pillar is going to be to, double down in the discussion with governments and jurisdictions on what needs to happen. Again, going back to the way we opened our call about the fact that there is this almost backlash around ESG and a very strong politicization of the issue. It's going to be very important next year. That is an election year in Europe, an election year in the US, to have this message that this has to transcend political lines. This is about, sustainable economic growth, about, people's well-being, and also about the planet, but everything is linked. And we are going to produce a manifesto for business travel in terms of, the priorities for the sector and specific policy call to actions in different regions in terms of the, legal certainty, predictability, and also, the incentives and sometimes mandates that are needed to, create that level playing field for the transition in business travel.
Awesome. a full list of ambitious and exciting plan for 2024. Please keep us posted and love to hear everything about it in the coming year when you're visiting us again on this show. And to wrap up the conversation, as a seasoned professional in the sustainability industry, what would you recommend for people who are looking to build a career in the same industry, ESG and sustainability?
So I would encourage, any student interested in this path to actually go forward, because this is gonna be in high demand from every sector, every company. So first of all, I would say that's the right choice for, probably students who are still hesitating. The advice I would give is, like the technical background is very, very important, but for context on how to implement these technical skills in the business world, I think it's very important to complement it, by like business classes, or even, like courses that talk about the policy landscape, because again, like it's a systems approach that needs to happen, and being conversant in sustainability needs to be coupled by, like being conversant in, like business growth, in policy. It's very important to have, like this comprehensive picture on how like the systems approach will work down the line.
Before we go maybe to the final note, I just wanted to make an observation when I talked about harmonization. I'm sure many of us know that planes are split in business class and economy class. If you look at the plane, the plane is not only business travel, the train is not only business travel. So I think your efforts are actually harmonizing, to steal your thunder, are harmonizing also the travel industry for family and for non-business travel.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Everything is linked. And, when we talk about the impact and the solution, it's going to be about travel overall. And, everyone loves to travel. It's what connects the world. So, I hope that everyone really feels vested to the success of, like the overall travel industry when it comes to a green transition, because, it's something that is beautiful and that we want to keep for the generations to come, making sure that, it's done in a sustainable way. So, yeah, and moving eventually from net zero, like travel in terms of emissions to just zero emissions travel, which I think is going to be possible down the line. But the question is, how fast do we get there?
Thank you.
Thank you, Delphine, for taking the time today, sharing everything with us. And thank you, Manuel. Thanks to all of our audience for tuning in. Make sure to join us every week for a new episode of AKFI's Actionable ESG Talks series, where you can gain new perspective on how to mitigate risk and create value by integrating ESG and digital transformation. Until next week, bye for now from myself, Manuel, and our guest today, Delphine.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Isabel. Bye-bye.